In the year of our Lord 1348, in the border town of Lichtenberg, nestled between forest and fog, far from papal reach and imperial pride, the black wind began to blow. It did not howl, but breathed. Warm in winter. Thick. Heavy. As though the air itself began to rot. The people spoke of it first as a curse from the east, then as judgment, then as rumor. But by mid-April, when the pigeons stopped returning to their towers and the church bells began to toll without wedding or feast, it was clear, something ancient had awoken, and it had no name the town dared speak. At the center of the town stood a man named Leontius. Not a nobleman, nor priest, but a physician, trained in Padua, steeped in Galenic theory and the scrolls of Avicenna. He had returned to Lichtenberg only 5 years prior, bringing with him a wife from Genoa and a daughter born during a thunderstorm, both with raven hair and clear, dark eyes. Leontius believed in balance, hot and cold, wet and dry, the four humors and the ordered body. But when the sickness came, it laughed at balance. It seeped into lungs and under skin. It blackened fingers and tongues. It turned breathing into betrayal. At first, he treated the ill as one might treat fever, leeches, broth, bleeding. But the black swellings grew like fruit under the arms and groin. No poultice could soften them. The dead began to outnumber the living. The town grew silent. Flies arrived before messengers. Dogs fled. Even the rats seemed to vanish, leaving only the sound of coughing behind shuttered doors. One morning, Leontius found his daughter sitting at the hearth, quiet, hands folded. She said, "The angels are crying in the chimney." Her lips were dark. She died by evening. His wife followed 2 days later, her lungs filling with something that was not water, not blood, but both. Leontius held her hand until it grew colder than the stones of their house. And then, alone, he stood. In the dark, men begin to bargain with silence. He donned a robe of oiled linen and a mask shaped like a bird, filled with lavender and mint. The mask was meant to ward off miasma, to confuse death with a creature it would not recognize. But Leontius no longer believed in such distinctions. He walked the streets like a ghost of medicine. He burned herbs in iron bowls, wrote prayers in Latin though he no longer prayed. His fingers blistered from lye and vinegar, his voice rasped from smoke. He treated all who called, and when no one called, he still knocked. Sometimes, he wept behind the beak. But tears dried quickly in plague time. There is a moment when grief and duty intertwine, until one no longer remembers whom he is saving, others, or what remains of himself. Leontius, once a man of science, became something else. Not saint, not scholar. Just a figure in the fog, with a bag of tools and a mask that never blinked. And outside the town, the forest stood still, as though waiting. The garden behind Leontius' house had once grown sweet herbs and pale flowers. His wife tended it with quiet hands, and his daughter had named each rosemary bush after a star. Now, the leaves hung gray with ash, and the soil coughed up nothing but bones of birds and splinters of bark. Leontius no longer returned home. The rooms were too still. His wife's shawl still hung by the door. The cup his daughter drank from still held a dried ring of honey tea. The silence inside the house was heavier than any corpse. He moved instead into the old apothecary near the chapel. No one else dared to. The air stank of vinegar, camphor, and iron, the tools of the healer's trade, turned useless by something too large, too cruel, too unseen. Each day he walked the streets in his mask and robe, like a bird caught in a nightmare. Children, if any remained, called him the death crow. Others whispered prayers or shut their windows as he passed. No one looked him in the eye, not that they could. He did not speak unless necessary. His hands did the talking now. They dressed boils, lanced sores, poured oils, sometimes shook with rage when the body before him belonged to a child no older than his own had been. The sickness spared neither piety nor poverty. Monks died in mid-chant. Merchants died with coins still in hand. Prostitutes and bakers, soldiers and tailors, none different beneath the shroud. He learned to read the signs, the stink of rot before breath failed, the blackening of toes before the heartbeat gave way. He began to burn the dead himself when the gravediggers stopped coming. By mid-May, the death carts no longer passed. By June, he stopped counting the corpses. One evening, a woman with sunken eyes and waxen skin appeared outside the apothecary. She wore the gown of a noble, but her hands trembled like a beggar's. Her son lay in a cart behind her, limp, mouth open, black spit at the corners. Leontius looked once and knew. "Let me help him," he said. "No," she whispered. "I want you to stay with him. I'm afraid, he will die afraid." So he sat with the boy, holding his hand until the small fingers loosened. It took hours. The mother said nothing the whole time. When it was over, she kissed her son's forehead and walked into the woods. She did not return. There is a silence that follows death louder than any church bell. Leontius began to feel it in his chest, not sorrow, but something deeper. A stilling. A stone in the soul. Not despair, but the shape of it. One morning, he awoke on the apothecary floor, having not remembered falling asleep. He looked at his hands and saw blood under the fingernails, but whose, he did not know. He began writing letters. Not to anyone living. Letters to the dead. His wife. His daughter. Sometimes to no one at all. There is no longer day and night, only shadow and work. I do not remember the sound of laughter. Is mercy still real, if no one is left to witness it? He hid the letters in glass jars and buried them in the garden where once the rosemary stars had bloomed. By midsummer, the town had no rhythm. The bell of the chapel had broken in a windstorm. The priest had died with his eyes open and his hands clenched around a splinter of the true cross. The sacristy now housed ravens. And still, Leontius walked. Masked. Alone. Among the ruins of breath. There is no glory in resisting death. Only the weight of it. But he still walked. Not because he hoped, but because he refused not to. Autumn came without color. The leaves fell, but not in gold, only in brown and gray, like paper crumbling in a fire not yet lit. The sun barely touched Lichtenberg anymore. When it did, it filtered through the fog like a candle seen through tears. By then, the town was nearly hollow. The cobbled streets were layered in dust, not from time, but from ash, the soft, weightless remains of what had once been breath, bone, linen. No one swept. No one sang. Even the wind had grown careful, as though afraid to disturb the dead. Leontius moved through it like the final stitch in a burial shroud. His mask, the long-beaked thing, once white, had yellowed with age and bile. The herbs stuffed in its snout had long lost their scent. Yet he kept them there. Lavender. Mint. Wormwood. A ritual not of protection now, but of memory. He had not spoken aloud in weeks. The human voice seemed too alive, too presumptuous. He communicated through gestures, chalk on slate, the press of fingers on a wrist. Eyes did the rest, eyes that had seen too much to blink. One night, as rain whispered against the shutters of the apothecary, Leontius lit a dozen candles and opened his old notebooks. The ink was fading, but the lines remained steady. Diagrams of bodies, lists of tinctures, notes from a time when he still believed the body could be read like scripture. He flipped past them. He turned instead to the blank pages. And there, he began to write not remedies, but thoughts. Quiet, heavy thoughts, shaped by silence. There are deaths which take the body, and deaths which leave it behind to watch. I am no longer healing. I am witnessing. Does the act of care still matter, when there is no longer consequence? He paused. The candle beside him flickered. He dipped the quill again. Perhaps mercy is not for the living, but for those who remember the living as they were. Outside, a dog howled. A rare sound now. The animals had begun to return, tentatively, like memories creeping back after fever. Birds nested in the belfry again, though the bell never rang. Life, it seemed, did not wait for grief to finish. One morning, Leontius found a child at his doorstep. Thin, filthy, wrapped in a torn curtain. A girl. No older than 7. She looked at him with eyes too tired for her face. She did not speak. He knelt before her. Removed his mask slowly. Let her see his face, hollowed, bearded, human. She did not flinch. Inside, he gave her broth. She ate without haste, as if she had long forgotten hunger but still respected it. When she finished, she pointed at the mask. "Crow," she said. He almost smiled. She stayed. He did not ask where she came from. He suspected she would not answer. Instead, he taught her how to clean wounds, how to crush dried herbs with a stone, how to listen for breathing under fever. She followed without question. In silence, they moved together. Two shapes among ghosts. There is no cure for grief. But there is something close to it in presence. Leontius found himself watching her as she slept on the apothecary floor, wrapped in a wool cloak far too large. She made small sounds in her dreams, the kind children make when the world has not yet vanished. He found he did not mind them. He dreamt again, for the first time in months. In the dream, he stood in his old garden. But instead of ash, there grew lilies. His wife hummed, faceless, and his daughter laughed from somewhere he could not see. And though he woke with a heavy chest, he did not wake in despair. The candlelight still burned. The mask still hung by the door. But now there were 2 bowls on the table. And that was enough. Winter arrived not with snow, but with stillness. The kind of stillness that settles in the bones of a place, in the hinges of doors that no longer open, in the air that hangs too long between footsteps. In Lichtenberg, silence had become a second architecture. It filled the spaces where voices used to live. But on the 12th day of December, just before dawn, a sound broke the stillness. A bell. Not loud. Not triumphant. A thin, uncertain toll from the chapel, long untouched. Leontius and the child froze where they stood, hunched over a bowl of bitterroot. The sound rang again, tremulous, as if the rope were pulled by unsure hands. 3 tolls. Then silence. He stood. She looked at him. Who? He did not answer. They went together, stepping out into frost and smoke. Snow had fallen in the night, soft and thin like the veil on a dead bride. Their boots left the only tracks on the road. The chapel door creaked open to a scent of mold and old incense. Inside, the shadows still slept. But near the altar stood a boy, perhaps 12, cloaked in wool, eyes swollen from tears or hunger. He held the bell rope in both hands. When he saw Leontius, he knelt. Not in reverence. In exhaustion. The girl stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. He wept. Leontius asked nothing. He only helped the boy stand and led him to the apothecary. Another soul added to the quiet. That night, they ate in silence. 3 now. Over the weeks that followed, others came. A man with no voice, whose hands bore the burns of old fires. A woman with twins, one dead, one blinking. An old nun who no longer prayed, but still hummed the notes of forgotten hymns. Lichtenberg, that city of the dead, began to stir. No one claimed it. No one led. But slowly, houses were unboarded. Fireplaces were cleared. Wells drawn. The dogs returned. The birds sang, but softly, as if unsure of permission. Leontius watched it all from his window. He felt nothing at first. Then, something worse than sorrow, guilt. As though by continuing to live, he betrayed those who had not. But guilt, like plague, cannot be cured. Only carried. One evening, a woman brought him a child with a fever, not plague, just common sickness. He gave her a tincture and smiled, faintly. She looked at him with something close to gratitude. She said, "We thought you were a myth." He replied, "I am." That night, he stood before the cracked mirror in the apothecary. Slowly, he removed the mask, not with ceremony, but with weariness. The leather strap stuck to his skin. His reflection startled him. The man before him was aged far beyond his years. Lines etched like warnings. Eyes hollow but awake. A face no longer hidden from death, but shaped by it. He washed his hands. Not in preparation, but in memory. The girl, now bolder, now speaking, asked him, "Will the plague return?" He answered, "Everything returns. But not always in the same form." She thought about that for a long time. Then said, "If it comes again, I'll be ready too." There is a kind of strength born only in the broken. And a kind of hope that comes not from light, but from surviving the dark long enough to recognize the shape of morning. By spring, the bell rang every Sunday. Not loud. Not proud. But steady. The chapel did not fill, but it no longer stood empty. People sat at distances. Heads bowed, not always in prayer, sometimes in memory. And in the garden behind the apothecary, rosemary began to grow again. No stars. No names. Just leaves. Spring brought no celebration. Only thaw. The snow receded like an old scar, revealing the town not as it once was, but as it had become, smaller, quieter, laced with absences. Entire households had vanished, leaving only tilted doorways and burned thresholds. Yet amidst the ruins, life moved. Slowly. Cautiously. Like an animal stepping out from a trap it didn't realize it had survived. Leontius worked less now. Illness came, but not the Black Death. Coughs. Burns. Birthing pains. The kinds of wounds that belong to the living. He tended to them with a gentleness that had not always been there. His hands, though roughened by ash and time, had learned to hold again, not only to cut or cauterize. The girl, who now called herself Marit, watched everything. She learned with the hunger of someone who had seen too much death to waste the art of healing. She asked questions. Why does fever come without fire? Leontius answered, because sometimes the body burns where we cannot see. And what do we do when it doesn't break? He paused. Sometimes, we wait beside it. That is all. By midsummer, he began to feel it. A weariness not of muscle, but marrow. His joints ached even in stillness. He forgot names. Dropped instruments. Once, he looked down at his own hand and did not recognize it. He told no one. There is a kind of pride that survives even when the soul does not. The pride of the one who kept walking while others fell. He continued his rounds. He stitched a soldier's wound. He buried an old woman who died in sleep, not plague, he clarified to a frightened child. He mixed poultices with shaking fingers and told Marit to double-check his measurements. She obeyed. But she watched. One night, he awoke on the floor of the apothecary. The candles had burned low. His robe was soaked in sweat. His breath came in short, narrow bursts. Marit found him curled beside the herbs, one hand clutching the mask he no longer wore. You're ill, she said, quietly. He tried to wave her away. She did not move. You should rest. He looked at her, really looked. She was no longer the child he had taken in. Her hair had grown longer. Her hands were steady. There was depth in her eyes, and in her silence, something fierce. He smiled, but his lips trembled. Then you must work, he said. In the days that followed, he stayed in the back room. She took his place, not as him, but as herself. People came. She listened. Measured. Mixed. Comforted. She refused to wear the mask, though it still hung by the door like a memory. Instead, she wore only linen and her name. The town accepted her without ceremony. They brought eggs and bread as payment. Some lingered longer, just to speak. Marit told Leontius all of it each evening, kneeling by his bed, as if whispering news to a dying king. He listened, eyes closed, heart steady, as if those words kept him from crossing into some quieter place. On the 7th night of fever, he asked her, "Do you believe in souls?" She answered, "I believe in staying." He nodded. That was enough. In the final hours, as rain touched the shutters, Leontius turned to her and said, "Don't bury me in the chapel. Bury me in the garden. Where the rosemary grows." She wept, but quietly. Then he added, "Burn the mask." She hesitated. He looked at her, his gaze firm, fatherly, final. "Let it end with me." And then he slept. And did not wake. That night, flames rose behind the apothecary. The mask curled and cracked in the fire, releasing one last breath of dried lavender and smoke. The townsfolk watched from afar but did not interrupt. They knew what it meant. And in the morning, Marit knelt in the garden with a spade, the sun barely risen, the rosemary trembling in the wind. She worked alone. There was no bell that day. only wind. Years passed. Lichtenberg did not return to what it was. Nothing ever truly returns. But roofs were mended. Fences rebuilt. Laughter, cautious at first, found its way back into courtyards. Children were born who did not know the word plague, only the stories whispered at dusk, stories of the crow doctor, who walked through death and did not look away. They asked, was he real? And others answered, he never left. Marit kept the apothecary. She did not claim the title of physician, though the town gave it to her anyway. She worked with bare hands and clear eyes. She healed, not by miracle, but by staying. Her remedies were humble: boiled willow, crushed garlic, honey in cloth. But her presence had the weight of memory. People trusted her not because she promised survival, but because she had already endured what they feared. Each morning, she walked through the garden. The rosemary had thickened, joined now by sage and columbine. She spoke aloud there, not in prayer, but in report, as if to someone just beyond the hedgerow. The child with the burn healed well. The midwife's cough returned. I'll visit her today. No deaths this week. It was not ritual. It was remembrance. One day, a traveler arrived, thin, wrapped in foreign cloth, speaking with an accent that did not belong. He bore the signs Marit had once feared: swelling in the neck, a dry rattle in the lungs, the trembling of hands trying to grip fate. She examined him in silence. He watched her closely. You're not afraid, he said. No, she replied. Why? Because I've already buried my fear. He smiled, bitterly. And who taught you to do that? She paused. Then answered, a man who never stopped working. Even when it broke him. The illness did not spread. It passed through the traveler and into the soil. Lichtenberg was spared. Not by miracle. By vigilance. The people said it was because of her. Marit. The one who had learned the plague's language, not through books, but through love. She said nothing. She returned to her work. And in the quiet hours, she reread the letters Leontius had buried, the ones in glass jars, hidden in the garden. She unearthed them slowly, one by one. Faded ink. Smudged words. Still legible. There are deaths which take the body, and deaths which leave it behind to watch. I am no longer healing. I am witnessing. Perhaps mercy is not for the living, but for those who remember the living as they were. She copied them in her own hand. Added her own words beside his. Their voices mingled, not as teacher and student, but as two who had stood on opposite sides of the same fire. In time, people stopped calling him the Crow. The children never knew the mask, only the men in stories who had once walked through empty streets with a heart still open. His grave in the garden bore no name. Only a stone with 3 words. He stayed until silence. And still, Rosemary grew. Final reflection. There are no saints in plague years. Only those who choose to stay when everything else leaves. Not because they are fearless. Not because they are strong. But because something in them refuses to close. Perhaps that is what healing is, not a cure, but a witness. And when death stands at the door, perhaps the greatest mercy is not to defeat it, but to hold the hand of someone it cannot take unseen.